Great. Well, feel free during this introduction to introduce yourself on the chat. We've got some people that were in the workshop yesterday. We got some new people today as well. So if you want to just give a quick shout out to who you are, if you're a student or a entrepreneur or faculty member, that'd be great. Just to kind of create a little bit of community here before we jump in. But you are in the right place. We are in our second set of Start Something series webinars. Today we'll be talking all about Scrappy branding, branding for entrepreneurs, personal branding, how to brand on a budget, what does a brand actually mean. And this is a series of 6 that will last basically through the rest of April. So mark your calendars for these if you find valuable or specific topics might be more important to you. So before we get started, I just want to go over the agenda of what we'll be doing over the next hour. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about branding, specifically logos versus brands. What is the difference? What is the common misconception behind a logo and a brand? We'll be talking about the 5 important elements of branding that every small business, every entrepreneur, and really every person should think of, even if it's personal branding. And then we'll go into how to build a brand guideline document or brand standard document, and why that is important, and we'll end with just some Q&A. Before we jump in, though, I just want to give you a quick background on myself and who I am and why I'm delivering this specific workshop. My name is Grayson Kostelecki. If I have not met you, good to meet you. We'll do a virtual elbow bump to complete or to do social distancing. But my full-time job is working at the Iowa State Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship. I help student entrepreneurs with starting their own businesses through a variety of different programs and coaching. But I also have a pretty deep background in marketing and design as well. Previous to my current job, I worked as a web designer and digital marketing manager for the Ivy College of Business. Doing that for several years, and prior to that, I worked in the athletic industry as in the marketing field there. I also own and operate my own freelance design company where I do web design, graphic design, and videography for clients all across the country, ranging from startups to nonprofits to sports industry, dental offices, and kind of anything and everything between. So my real expertise comes in those areas right there in web design, graphic design, and photo and video, which is very specific to this particular talk today. So we'll just jump right in and kind of talk about these 2 definitions, or the common misconception that people think logos are brands, or even maybe the name of your company is a brand. That's really kind of a common thought amongst maybe non-marketers or people that are just getting into business. But in reality, I kind of want to debunk that this afternoon so you have a better idea of what a brand actually is and what it means for your business. So here's a series of logos. We all know what these are. They're very timeless logos. We all understand the brands or who the logo associates with that company. But the logo doesn't really tell you a whole lot about of what that company does. You might know the name IKEA or Red Bull or Coke, but it doesn't really describe the culture of the company. It doesn't really describe the inner workings, what they believe in, what they stand for, their processes, all of that sort of stuff. And that's really what a brand is for. A logo is a piece of a brand and a very important part of a brand. But there's definitely some clear definition that a logo is not a brand, it is a part of a brand. Before we jump into the 5 elements that I want to talk about of creating a brand, I want to talk about touch points, and really all of these things are what make up a brand. So you'll see on there logos and social media and maybe graphic design as things that maybe are pretty common to think about when it comes to branding. But there are other things that might not come to top of mind, such as telephone or voicemail or letterheads, um, your voice and tone. All of that is reflective of your brand and needs to be consistent across all of these different touch points. If you're going to get one thing out of this webinar today, I want to make sure that it is very clear that to have a successful brand that reflects who you are and what your company is, it really needs to be consistent across all platforms. And I'll jump into 5 key elements that I think are really important as starting points. There are definitely a lot more, but I think these are the most easy to grasp and understand to help you come up with a consistent brand. Good to see the chat is up and running. People are talking, so that's great. So this is an example of basically a screenshot of one of my favorite brands or branding examples. Raygun, if you're not familiar, is a company down in Des Moines and actually has locations all across the Midwest. But they started as a t-shirt shop where they like to call themselves "We Put Words on Things." That's in one of their about pages. That's how they describe their company. So with that just being said, it's a very casual type of company where they obviously have t-shirts, but they also have expanded their line to coasters and socks and artwork and onesies and really anything and everything in between. But Raygun is very simple and consistent and has a very consistent brand across all of their platforms. So Raygun being the brand of the company and the logo is all, and everything follows suit to that. So all of their fonts are the exact same. It's all capitalized. Everything is left justified on all of their material. When you see a Raygun shirt, even if you've never seen that specific shirt before, you know it's made by Raygun. And that is very transparent across their social platforms, their Facebook, Instagram, their website. All of their stuff looks very much the same, so you know it belongs to Raygun. In addition to their actual design style, they have a very casual tone to the company. Mike Draper, who is the owner of Raygun, if you've ever met him, he's a very casual individual. Maybe not necessarily the most PC, but that is who he is, and that is very clearly reflected in their about page on their website. So that's just the snippet in the middle of the screen that you see there is a snippet of about, and they have a very casual language that they write in. Not something you might see on like a bank or a law office about page where you use words like oopsie and talking about failing and a lot of exclamation marks and question marks and again, a very laid back environment, which is, again, who they are as a brand. It's who Mike is as an owner, and that's who their consumers are as well. Very casual, lots of t-shirts, socks, that sort of thing. Not really tailoring their brand to a suit and tie wearing demographic, and that's who they want, and they're then very successful because of that. One thing I do want to point out is if you know anything about the brand as well, is they tend to be a little liberal when we're talking about political parties, and I don't want to rub anybody the wrong way here, but that is just who the brand is. So you'll see a lot of democratic type materials and products that they create, and it really again goes back to what Mike and the company believes in, what they're standing for. And yeah, they might lose some customers because of that, maybe people who are on the other side of the political party, but they want to make sure that they're very clear on what they believe in, what their brand stands for, and so they don't really hold back when it comes to that. So the first element that I want to talk about, and even though I said it wasn't, a logo is not a brand, but it is a very important part of a brand. So over these next 5 resources that I'm going to be talking about, or elements I'm going to talk about, I'll go through some guidelines, some resources to help you, and then maybe show you a few examples as well. So with the first being a logo. Everybody knows what a logo is. It's very easy to create a logo. You could go onto Word right now, pick a cool font, pick a cool color, and you have a logo, essentially, of your brand. There is obviously a lot more to it than that. So a few guidelines if you want to get a high quality logo. Generally, you want to stick between 1 and 3 colors. Really, the trendy logo right now, or trends within the design industry, is having a 1-color logo. And the reason that is they convert very well to black and white. And what I mean by that is if you have a logo that has a rainbow of colors and has all these textures and gradients on them, when you convert it to black and white, you might lose bits and pieces of that logo. It might not reflect what your brand is, or you might even not even be able to tell that's the same logo as it is in color. And that's really it's not a great logo, because there are times when you need to have a black and white logo or a 1-color logo on a variety of different things. And when companies struggle to do that, you really might lose your branding when it comes to your company. The last thing you want to think about is size and variation. A logo that you create on a computer in InDesign or Photoshop might look good on your computer, but you really want to think about where else that logo is going to go. So for example, if you were a brewery and you were designing a logo for your brewery, 2 obvious places you think that logo might go is on the side of your building and on the bottle of the beer that you have. So you want to make sure the logo looks good there, but you want to think about the other variations where that logo might go. So coasters or menus or t-shirts or even bottle caps. So a logo on a bottle cap is going to look very different than a logo on the side of a building. So you want to think about that, and that's where variations come in. You can have multiple variations of a logo. Maybe one that is stacked, one that is long, and all of those are great options to have, because you are going to be using logos in different places within your brand or within your company. But you want to make sure they're all consistent as well. So consistent font, consistent graphic usage, consistent colors, but you are, it is advised to have a couple different variations as well. So when it actually comes to designing a logo, a couple resources I want to point out is if you are affiliated with Iowa State at all, whether you're a student, maybe you're an employee here or no students, I would start with the College of Design. There are thousands of incredibly talented students that are looking for portfolio work and a few extra bucks on the side. I would absolutely reach out to any design students that you know, or maybe faculty, to see if they could recommend a design student to maybe draw up some logos for you, and you can take them out for lunch or dinner, or throw them a couple bucks here. And I think it's a great place to really start when you're branding and designing a logo. Another one of my favorite resources are these crowdsourcing design platforms like Fiverr, Upwork, and 99 Designs. I'm most familiar with Fiverr. I've used them a couple times. If you're not familiar with them, basically you can log on to their site and hire freelancers from all across the world to do really just about anything for you, ranging from designing logos to websites to singing happy birthday to creating soundtracks, and really anything and everything between. And really can be as inexpensive as $5. It can also, if you want to pay for a little higher quality work, it can go, $50, $100, a couple $100 for work there, but it really can be as low as $5 to get some work done, which is a great option if you're on a low budget. An example of what I've done before is if I was working on a logo for a brand, and I went to Fiverr and basically paid 5 different designers $20 a piece, and had them come up with 2 or 3 variations of logos for me. And so I had a set of then 10 to 15 logos that I could pick and choose from, find styles that I liked, and then tweak them using that designer, go back and do a couple different variations, and the whole thing cost me $100. So really low price point to get started when it comes to logo design. And lastly, if you have the budget in your company, in the marketing budget, is go straight to a design firm. There's some incredible design firms locally here in Ames and down in Des Moines. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction if you're looking to do that. but you can get some great work done here in Central Iowa as well. You will pay a little bit more for that, but you'll also get some really, really high quality stuff. So the next brand element I want to talk about is fonts. You really want to be consistent with your fonts across all platforms, whether that is your website or graphic design material, flyers, brochures, anything like that. You really, really want to stay consistent in your fonts. So it's recommended to pick 2 fonts for your brand, one being a primary and the other being a secondary. Your primary font is used 90% of the time, and your secondary might be used for specific headers or call outs, other things to maybe draw a little bit more attention to that. And I'll show an example in a minute. If you're going to be using these fonts on the web, which at this point most people have websites, it is highly, highly recommended and almost necessary to use Google approved fonts. So Google approved fonts are a series, and there's hundreds of them that are confirmed that your web browsers, so Microsoft or Chrome and Firefox, are able to read those fonts. You can go, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of fonts out there. People are creating new fonts every day, but that doesn't mean that a web browser would be able to show that font correctly. It might not have the algorithm or that font family loaded to the HTML and CSS, so basically the language that web browsers use. So it's very, very important for you to use a Google approved font to make sure that your consumer is seeing the same font that you want them to see. A couple resources, again, Google Fonts is incredible. I highly recommend if you're going to be using, you have any sort of digital presence. And another one is called DaFont. DaFont is a website where you can go download thousands of fonts. Generally, they're all for free, and you can really filter through different. Let's see if I can pull it up here. You can filter through different types of font you want, whether it's maybe a modern font that is groovy and is a serif font. So it'll show you a variety of different fonts here, all able to be downloaded and used. Again, make sure that it is approved by Google, but those are just a couple good resources. A couple quick definitions I want to make sure I go over between serif and sans serif fonts. So right there you can see a serif font is like your Times New Roman, where it's a little bit more old school, has the curly cues on the ends of the letters, maybe the lines on them, and then a sans serif font is your more modern minimalist type fonts. Sans serif is definitely more popular right now, but doesn't mean there's not a place for serif fonts as well. And I want to show you an example of how actually Iowa State is doing a great job using serif and sans serif fonts. Iowa State has 2 approved fonts that you are allowed to use when you're designing using their brand standards. The sans serif font is a font called Universe, which you'll see 95% of these graphics. And then those few words that are in that serif font, so in the top graphic, Cyclone Aid, admissions in that left bracket, and invited in that right graphic, that really kind of helps those words stand out a little bit more. You might see them in certain headings on websites, but generally for the most part, Iowa State designers use that sans serif font in most of their stuff, but it's great to have a secondary font when needed. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is color palette. Color is a unique beast because it really there's a lot of psychology behind color, what colors mean, and there's just kind of a cool graphic explaining or showing different brands and what those colors represent within those brands. You could jump a lot more into the psychology of color. I'm not necessarily an expert when it comes to that. But it is something to keep in mind when you're choosing color for your brand or your business. So you want to definitely come up with specific colors for your brand and stick with those colors. As I just mentioned, color has meaning. So make sure that color makes sense for your customers. And really, I want to make sure that that color makes sense and resonates with your consumers and customers, and it's not just your favorite color. My favorite color is red, but I don't use red. And well, when I work at Iowa State, I do, fortunately. But when I do work for other clients, I don't make everything red just because it's my favorite color. Will figure out what that industry and what that consumer might resonate with. What are they trying to portray? Figure out what that brand might look like with that set of colors. And it's important to pick both primary and secondary colors. These are colors that you're going to use for everything going forward. And so you'll have a series of them. You'll have 2 to 4 primary colors, and then you'll have a list of secondary colors that you don't use as often, but you will use maybe sparingly throughout certain graphics or different things that you might use going forward. I'll give you an example here in just a minute, but I want to show you another great resource that I use all the time. It's called Adobe Color Wheel. And the Adobe Color Wheel is an incredible resource that is free, that allows you to come up with color palettes and explore different ideas that maybe other people are doing. So example, it looks like this blue is the color of the year for 2020. So you can scroll through and look at different color palettes that are already created. Or if you wanted to create your own, and let's say you really liked this particular red right here, it'll use color theory to come up with appropriate color palettes for you. There's a number of different filters you can do to find different types of color palettes depending on what you're trying to do. With that being said, it also provides all of the correct data for you to use all of that going forward. There's a lot more I could talk about color when it talks about hex codes, which are these series of numbers and letters that web browsers read to show the right color. Also gives you all the RGB, CMYK colors as well, which are different forms of printing and digital colors. But it's a really, really cool resource. I have it bookmarked and I use it all the time. So here's an example of a color palette used by Delta Airlines, actually. So this is straight from their website, and I just wanted to give you an example of what a color palette actually looks like. So they have their primary and secondary colors, which I would actually probably consider both primary, because you see the blue and red almost in all of their logos and design work. And then they have that third tier of colors, which I would consider secondary colors, that you don't see very often, and it even actually says in that note that those colors should only be applied in a very limited manner and should not be applied in large fields of color. So it really just helps them be consistent across all platforms. Whenever you see anything that is that blue or that red, it'll help you recognize that it's a Delta airline and maybe not one of their competitors like American or Frontier or anything like that as well. Next, I want to talk about photography. And I understand that we're all not photographers. We all don't have expensive cameras, but you can still have a right type of photography for your brand. And there's several ways you can go about that. The first, I want to talk about choosing a photography style. So there's tons of different styles out there. And on the next slide, I'll show you a couple examples. But it's important to have a style that reflects who your brand is. And all of these are consistent across all of these brand points. You want to keep them consistent and really reflect who your brand is and who your consumer is, so you can help solve their problem. Next point I want to talk about is you do not steal photos or images from Google, specifically when you're using them for your business. That definitely is illegal. There are infringements on that that could end up very, very poorly for you. Luckily, there's some great resources to allow you to have royalty-free images out there, or you can obviously always use your own images as well. But when doing creating brands and images for business, it is highly illegal to steal images from Google. And lastly, high-resolution photography is very important. our phone cameras are good and they get better every year, but they're not as good as SLR, DSLR cameras or mirrorless, basically professional cameras. The lighting, the contrast, the pixelation is just isn't there. Something that small doesn't do what a professional camera does. So I really try to avoid using phone photography whenever possible. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the most convenient thing you have. It's in your pocket at all times. But if you have the ability to find images that are not taken from a phone, and I'll go over a few resources, especially when you're printing, whether that's a poster or a magazine or a flyer, using phone images just really doesn't cut it with the pixelation that is out there. Even though our cameras do shoot pretty well, or our phones do shoot pretty well, it still doesn't cut a professional photography. So as far as resources for finding images, basically you just want to Google royalty-free images. Those three companies right there, Pixabay, Unsplash, and Pexels, are three great databases of images that you can download for free, use for business, super high quality, and it's an awesome resource to use when finding images for your company. Another basically the step up from those is a company called Shutterstock. Shutterstock has a database of thousands and thousands and thousands of images, graphics, sounds, music, video that you can use for your company as well. There is a subscription for that, depending again on your marketing budget, what you can afford. But that is, basically your next level up from those free royalty image websites there. So when talking about style of photography, I have four different basically styles on here. The top left is a group of, it's from a staff page from a website that looks like maybe it's a law firm or a bank or maybe an investment firm. Very professional, same background, black suit jackets, and it reflects who that company is. You want somebody that is professional and in business when you're going to those types of businesses. And then the image below is from a staff page from a design agency, a creative agency. And so those images also reflect what you're going to get when you go work with that company. You're going to get creative people. You're going to get fun, energetic, maybe kind of people that think outside the box. And that's what you want when you go work with a creative agency. So again, those photos really, those styles reflect the brand and also the consumers on who they're attracting. On the top right-hand side, I don't know anything about, where those images, what brand they're reflecting, but when I look at those, I kind of think, it's kind of mysterious. There's a lot of gray tones. It's pretty muted, and it's reflective of what that brand is trying to portray, and they're all very consistent. Although it's not the same person or same background, or they're not all they're doing different things, but you can tell those are shot with a similar style. And lastly, the bottom right images with that teal blue color that is apparent in all those images, very detail oriented, very, obviously has that teal and blue in it. Probably very reflective of what the brand is. So when you think of, a company like John Deere and John Deere green, you see green in every single one of their images, whether it's the tractor or the field or the grass or whatever it is. So, obviously they're very specific with the type of coloring in their images. You don't want to see a lot of blue or red or yellow in John Deere images. It's great to keep that in mind when you are picking your photography. The last thing I want to talk about is tone. So tone is pretty easy concept to understand, but basically how formal or informal is your writing? And you're writing on Facebook, you're writing on your website, you're writing, or even when you're giving presentations or speeches or talking at conferences or talking with customers. What is your tone and voice? And how does it relate to the consumer? Is it appropriate for the consumer? does it reflect your brand correctly, and just be consistent across all platforms. Again, I gave the example of Raygun earlier, where they're a very informal, jokey company who might not be the most serious about what they do, but it's reflective of them, and it resonates with their consumers as well. A couple just bonus elements that I don't think are necessarily applicable to all businesses, but are worth mentioning. So patterns and texture. You can think about a couple companies that might have very consistent patterns and texture amongst their products. So the first being Apple has that basically that Chromebook finish on all of their products. You can see that piece of metal on anything, or see a computer that is that specific color, and it is immediately it's an Apple product. And same with Louis Vuitton. They have that texture, that pattern on all or most of their inventory and products, and immediately it's a Louis Vuitton product. So it's very consistent across their entire brand. And then same with sounds. These are a couple examples of multi-billion-dollar companies who have commercials and been doing commercials for years and years and years. But again, they're very consistent across all of their promotions. So you got McDonald's, I'm loving it, and then you have Intel's. I hope you guys heard that. Once you hear those two sounds, exactly what company that is reflecting. So the last thing I'm going to cover here is I'm just going to talk about a brand standards document. So I've been I gave you 5 basically key guidelines to think about when coming up with a brand, and a couple bonus ones as well. Now what you really need to do is put all of those into one place. You can be a 1-page document. It can be, I've seen up to a 100-page document. If it's a very large, complex organization, I would stick with a 1-page to get started. And it's really 2 reasons you want to do that. The first reason being you want to hold yourself accountable to keeping those brands consistent. You want to make sure that when you're writing a blog last week, it has the same tone of voice that it has this week. When you're taking photos out there, or you're looking for photos, you want to make sure they have the same style on them as well. Or you're working, creating something for Facebook, make sure it uses the same colors. You want to make sure you use the same red, same whatever for everything going forward. And additionally, if you get to the point in your business where you hire somebody, an intern, or maybe a graphic designer to design a website for you, you can hand them this document and say, these are our brand standards. Now go make something that is consistent with us. Because the last thing you want to do is they give you a product and you say, well, that red is not correct. We don't like those images, but it's not the right font. And now you have to go through a series of variations and revisions, and neither you like doing that or the designer likes doing that. So it's really important to have these all in one place to, again, hold you accountable to keep you consistent, but also let these third-party people that you're working with create very consistent work for you as well, even though they might not directly work for your company. So here's an example of a brand identity or brand standard document for American Red Cross. It's a 1-page document that I actually split up into 2 pages because it was too tall. But it covers basically everything we just talked about. So they have 3 different, looks like logo variations there at the top left, more of a button style, a classic logo, and then what it looks like on a background. There's some more detail down underneath that about sizing and pixels and more graphic design related things, but just basically making sure that your logo is big enough to recognize. They show the colors that are in the American Red Cross uses their primary colors, and then a list of secondary colors. So you can see they have quite a few secondary colors there. And they don't use those very often, but they do have a variety. So when they do use secondary colors, it can be consistent. Moving over to the right-hand side, you'll see the different font families they use, and it looks like they both have a serif and a sans serif font. When to use all caps or bold, certain colors within fonts. And lastly, they talk about their tone of voice, which is really important. You know, they want to be uplifting, inviting, empowering, and personal when writing about American Red Cross. So that's just an example of what a real company's brand standard document looks like. Here's just a real simple document that you could create for your company or your brand. So you have your primary logo, your alternate logos, and your color palette. What fonts you use, you know, what 2 fonts you're going to use going forward, your tone of voice, and then just some sample photography that reflects on your company, what you think is a good portray of what you do and what your consumers would really resonate with. So I showed you at the beginning the example of Raygun and how I think they're a good example of consistent branding. Here's just one more example, kind of covering things we talked about. The company here is Two Rivers Marketing, which is a B2B marketing company down in downtown Des Moines. They actually relatively recently went through a rebrand. So they've got a new logo and new branding elements. And they're really using the kind of like maroon and deep red colors throughout a lot of their work. So you can see on their website and then their Facebook image here, same logo, same type of pattern and texture used throughout those 2 places. And here's another couple more screenshots of their blog, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, and how they're just, you can really tell this is the same company across all different platforms. And it's just a good example of consistent branding. Here's a couple resources that I may or may not have touched on, that are things that I use all the time. So when it comes to design, I use Adobe Creative Suites just because I have a pretty good background in using that, but I am also self-taught. I never went to any sort of school or formal training to use Adobe. You know, basically YouTube and Google University taught me how to do everything there. So if I can do it, doesn't mean means you can as well. But it is pricey, and they are pretty big task, or pretty big software to grasp if you're not familiar with them at all. A great alternative is a resource called Canva. Canva is a free online platform where you can do graphic design. They've got a bunch of great templates, drag and drop. If you know how to use Word, you can use Canva, and you can create some really cool professional looking graphic pieces, whether it's for Facebook or Instagram or your website or whatever it might be. Canva's a great option. There's a free version and a paid version, depending on how much stuff you want to unlock through them. When it comes to websites, I didn't really talk about websites a whole lot. I am in a couple webinars doing a webinar on landing pages and websites for small businesses. But when it comes to those, I personally use WordPress. It's a very powerful tool, but a couple of easier options are Wix and Squarespace, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions about different platforms to build websites on. Photography, again, just Google royalty-free images. Do not steal from Google, and just find some royalty-free images. Take your own photos, and if you have any interest in photography, professional grade SLR cameras are getting very affordable. You can get a professional grade a camera for a couple $100, $200-300, which it's not free. It's not something that you do have to invest in, but the quality of images are just tenfold better than what you can get on your phone. And then lastly, colors. I mentioned that Adobe Color Wheel, something I use all the time. Amazing free resource from Adobe. So those are just some of my most used resources when it comes to branding and design. And yeah, that kind of just wraps up the webinar for today. You have my contact information right there. We do have 4 more webinars coming up covering copywriting, social media, landing page and websites, and then email marketing and newsletters over the next month. At this point, I will just monitor the chat. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have. I'll go ahead and look through that, and I'll stay on for here for a while. If you have any other questions that maybe you don't want to chat me, you can always email me. You have my contact information there. I believe I emailed all of you this morning as well. So with that being said, thanks for attending today's webinar on branding. I will shoot out a survey and a YouTube link to this webinar later today or tomorrow morning. We'll see how long it takes to get the video uploaded so you can use it and share it going forward. But with that being said, I will kind of just sit around and talk or look at the chat and answer any questions you might have. So I see a question about, suggestions for specific cameras. There's kind of three main players when it comes to cameras, Canon, Nikon, and Sony. You just have your different types of people that prefer which brand to use. I'm personally a Canon person. I've always been a Canon person. I started with their entry-level Canon T series, so I think they're up to like a T7 or a T8 right now. It is an awesome camera to get started. I just pulled up I just looked at Google. Looks like you can get them for looks like $300 to $400 for the Canon T7, which comes with a lens, a built-in flash, a bag. That would be my suggestion. You can always look on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. But I would start with the Canon T series, T7, T8, and do some research there. I'd be happy to chat more about different types of cameras as well offline if you want. So Brent, I see that you asked about animated logos. So are you talking about like GIFs? Is that kind of what you're referring to? Or maybe just more graphic related logos, using some sort of graphic element instead of just a word? I'll answer that. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but I think if it is a moving logo versus a stationary logo. Okay, so at this point, there's only certain platforms that can even showcase, GIFs or moving logos. I definitely wouldn't use it as a primary logo. You could definitely have it in your repertoire as something that is appropriate for maybe a moving logo. Trying to think. I mean, social platforms are the first thing that come to mind that might make sense, but really specific ones, Instagram or probably the only one that comes to mind that might be appropriate to use that. I don't see them as a very big trend right now. Doesn't mean they won't be trendy going forward. If you have any examples, I'd love to see what you're maybe referring to a little bit more. Not something personally that I've thought a whole lot about, I guess. I don't know if that is the best answer, but I would tend to stick with just more traditional stationary logos. Just jump through the chat here real quick. I'll stay on for a few more minutes, but feel free if you don't have any more questions, you can go ahead and jump off. Hope to see you guys next week for copywriting and social media marketing on this channel. Feel free to share these with your friends or people that you might think are beneficial. But other than that, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you guys all next week.